and welcome to Books in the World, a production of the Cape Cod Writers Center. I'm your host, Kathleen Murphy. Books in the World is an interview show produced by the Cape Cod Writers Center over the Cape Cod Community Access Channel. Our goal is to show how writers, illustrators, publishers, editors, and others in the literary field play their roles in the world of books and other communication media. The Writers Center was established 57 years ago and sponsors a 4-day annual writers conference every summer. Books in the World has been broadcasting continuously for 41 years. Today, we are delighted to welcome Skip Finley, author of the book, Whaling Captains of Color, America's First Meritocracy. And what an informative book. Thanks so much for being here, Skip.
Thank you very much, Kathleen. This seems like it should be some fun.
I certainly hope so. I'd like to share your background with our audience first, then we'll get into your book. Skip built his career in radio, becoming a well-known executive and station owner. He served as vice chairman of the National Association of Broadcasters and chairman of the Radio Advertising Bureau. He served on virtually all broadcasting industry boards of directors and on their executive committees. This retired broadcaster has written for and been featured or quoted in most media industry trade publications. Skip's career included responsibility for 44 radio stations, 5 that he owned, and encompassed 18 markets. His experience includes successes with radio networks, syndicated programs, and a satellite channel. Skip summered on Martha's Vineyard since 1955 and has lived there since 1999. Having attempted to retire since the age of 50, he keeps returning to communications, and he decided to become a writer. From 2012 to 2017, he was a weekly Oak Bluffs town columnist for the Vineyard Gazette. Currently, he is director of sales and marketing for the Vineyard Gazette Media Group. Skip has written articles for Sea History Magazine, Cape Cod and the Islands Magazine, 2 Martha's Vineyard Museum publications, The Intelligencer, and MVM Quarterly, and many more. As I said, I really enjoyed this book and learned so much about the commercial whaling industry. From the early 1700s to the early 1900s, this industry, this sea hunt and tremendous sacrifice to harvest a source of light, coincides with the history of the United States, encompassing the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Civil War. It also coincides with slavery and race relations in this country, most of it heartbreaking. But this book highlights some great examples of people persevering through significant discrimination and worse. We'll be discussing these topics over the next 25 minutes. So Skip, welcome again. I really enjoyed and learned a lot from your book. Please tell us about Whaling Captains of Color, America's First Meritocracy.
All right. Interestingly enough, this story begins one day when I decided to retire again, but to try to do something productive, I'd always wanted to be a writer. So I wrote the Oak Bluffs town column for the Vineyard Gazette for just almost exactly 5 years. Along the way, an amazing thing happened. The Charles W. Morgan was restored and relaunched. For many of you, probably don't have a full appreciation of the magnitude of that, but the Charles W. Morgan as a whale ship is America's second oldest ship after the USS Constitution, which pretty much everyone has heard of. It's the last working whale ship. It's very important to the island of Martha's Vineyard because 6 of its captains, including its first captain, and 17 of its 30-member first crew were all people from Martha's Vineyard, which has an amazing history of whaling along the way. So our editor of Martha's Vineyard magazine, which is owned by the Vineyard Gazette Media Group that I work for, said, listen, I'm going to devote, a whole issue to the Morgan because it's so important. And how would I like to write a story about the black whaling captain, William A. Martin? In all candor, all I heard was I get to write for a magazine. I knew nothing about whaling. I knew less than nothing about black whaling captains, and was delighted to find that there was one. A couple of my failings I've tried to turn into positiveness is that I'm incredibly ADHD and OCD at the same time. So once I started researching this fella, I was astounded to find out that someone could have, in those years in 1880, been anything, much less captain of a whale ship if you happen to be black as well.
So you were able to do a deep dive into this and perfectly happy to do so.
That's the ADHD in me and the OCD. You can probably see over there behind my shoulder, over this shoulder. Most of those books are whale ships because whaling books. Because in doing that deep dive, what I did was start buying books about whaling. So today, I think I've got about 160 of them, and I think it was at a point where I'd spent about $1,400 on Amazon. And my wife said, "What the hell are you doing?" I said, "Well, if I found out this is a black whaling captain, I'm writing an article about him, and guess what? There's more."
Wow.
So I lost control, but she saw I was productively busy and left me alone. Now I'm probably a little closer to $4,000 for those 160 books.
Wow.
But what I did was to read them all and write in it or put a little sticky note on all the important facts that I knew nothing about.
Right. So this book is incredibly well researched, and I noticed that in the back of the book you've got like over 50 pages of appendices and notes and bibliography. So it sounds like it was an amazing process. Did you know that there were so many whaling captains of color when you started this? It sounds like you didn't.
No, I did not know anything about that, or them, or that there was even one. But part of my responsibilities in the old radio station days and buying and selling radio stations was due diligence. I had a lot of experience writing business plans and strategic documents and things like that. So in that due diligence, when you're raising hundreds of millions of dollars, people want to know where you got your information.
Right.
So I took all that data and I made notes. I essentially put all that on a spreadsheet, by the book, then by the author, and then by the information, which might have been, Native Americans, and then, dash whatever the fact was. So I'd be able to access that and find more.
Right.
By the way, that spreadsheet now is probably 1,700 lines deep of facts that I've found from reading all those books and making all those notes, from which I was able to kind of piece together a story.
Yeah.
And the story for me was, first, what is whaling and how these guys get involved, and then how they get to be captains.
Right.
Well, the punchline to that story is fundamentally easy. This was a job that was so difficult that no one wanted to do it. Mm-hmm. And the people who did it more than once, over and over, who became proficient, happened to have been men of color.
Yeah. Wow. I noticed that, and we've got some illustrations that we may be able to insert here. You've got in your appendix, you've got a whole list of the whaling captains of color that you found, and also captains known to have been killed by whales, which is kind of amazing.
It's not as many as people think.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Our whole education about whaling is surrounded with Melville's Moby Dick,
which is really a rather romantic view of it. It's been years since I've even looked at that or picked it up, but
it's
if I remember it. Yeah,
the literature is simply amazing. It's fundamentally lyrical, if you will.
Yes.
There have been books written about Moby Dick.
Yes, which is amazing. Yeah. When I listened to your presentation at Tales of Cape Cod in Barnstable Village, I think you quoted someone who was trying to describe the life of a whaler. Can you describe what whalers had to do to catch and slaughter a whale?
Yeah. There are roughly 30 of you aboard a ship that's maybe twice the length of the average American home for 3.5 or 4 years.
Oh.
Over that period of time, you may in fact only capture maybe 10 or so whales a year. So right away, you see that a lot of your time is spent in pure boredom.
Yeah.
When, it's all, there's several chapters of the book devoted to, really, how truly bad it was.
Yeah.
And one of the worst parts, in fact, was actually capturing the whale.
Yeah.
The story goes like this. There's a guy way up at top of the ship on the mast, and he is looking around to see where a whale might be spouting, so he could point to it and say, "Lar blows," or something. So the rest of the people on the ship would all face towards that whale. The ship would sail in that direction. and the captain says something on the order of man the ships. 6 people get into each of 3 or 4 whale ships, which are, very fast considering.
Yeah, and we've got some of your pictures we're going to insert for that from Pedro Valera and
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there's some good pictures. So anyway,
So those little boats, yeah.
so the captain says, man the boats. The men jump into this ship. They lower them down to the water, and they begin rowing towards that whale that doesn't know what they are or that it's coming. They get as close as they can to hit it, to stick it with a harpoon.
I think you said within like 10 feet, right? They have to be within about 10 feet.
Well, the furthest way that's been recorded that someone actually killed a whale was about 40 feet. A guy named Claude Oliveira did that. And or over the history of whaling, when my calculations are, we killed about 300,000 of the largest creatures to ever walk the earth.
Oh my God.
He was 42 feet away. That's the furthest. Everyone else, you would assume, was closer. 2 animals, 50 tons and as much as, 100 feet long.
Unbelievable.
Well, once that harpoon stuck in the whale, then you go on the archetypical Nantucket sleigh ride, as it was called.
Yes.
The whale pulls you until it's exhausted, and the men pull their boat closer and they stab it and stab it and stab it and stab it until it dies. And it gets more disgusting as you go on. Typically, as a whale dies, it regurgitates, what is eaten for the last period of time.
So the smell. You highlight some of the smells on it are absolutely horrible.
Unimaginable. And you figure for a sperm whale, its food was squid. So that's all terrible. Yeah. The water's filled with blood. Finally, the whale dies. Well, then you row and tow the fish, if you will, back to the boat.
Yeah.
That might be a trip that, 1 mile an hour, may take 6 or 8 hours to get back to the boat. That may even be dark by time that occurs.
So they're already exhausted because they're trying to keep the whaleboat steady, the rowers, right? And
they're rowing. They're towing,
No, I meant they kill the animal first. And just to kill the animal, they must have to kind of keep themselves upright, right?
Yes.
And then after the whale is dead, they still have this exhausting ride back, right? Rowing back.
Then they have to row it back to the ship.
Unbelievable.
They get alongside the ship and there's a platform, roughly equivalent to like a window washer's platform, if you will.
Right.
And they winch parts of the whale up. They cut it around just like an orange. Mm-hmm. And they cut the blubber and they put hooks on it and they winch that blubber on top of the whale ship. They cut it into smaller and successively smaller pieces. Each piece goes into what was called a tripod or an iron cauldron with fire underneath that melts that blubber down into oil.
Right.
While
and this is a flammable, and this is, I'm sorry, but this is a flammable substance. So
at some point, yes.
Right. So at some point, they've got barrels of this all around and they've got a fire on board to put the new material in and melt it down. So, and you had a phrase for it.
Pitching and yawing.
Pitching and yawing, but you also compared it to working in a
abattoir.
Right. I was amazed at that when you said that at the Tales of Cape Cod. I was just working in an abattoir in the middle of a roller coaster or whilst riding a roller coaster, right?
Well, we're only scratching the surface.
Yeah.
By that, it is said that you could smell a whale ship before you could see it on the horizon. So these are the conditions. Right. All of the gore, all of the blood being dropped into the sea, the men on the platform a couple of feet above the water's line, they're surrounded by sharks who are looking to enjoy a meal, as well.
Yeah, this is off topic, but I'm struck by how it was 200 years that this was going on. And there were a lot of other ships in the sea for several decades of those years. And I'm thinking, this is not what you hear about. This is not what you read about when you think of the seafaring history of England or the United States or wherever. I mean, it's amazing. It's really amazing.
The whole of our experience is tied to the literature, of Moby Dick.
Yeah.
Which could be a science fiction movie. It could be any kind of a story.
Right.
It is, however, extraordinarily unlikely that a sperm whale would actually attack a ship.
Yeah, right, right,
Okay.
right.
You know, if you want to, if you now that I've done a little bit of homework and you want to do the math, and you say, you know, oh wow, well, you know, well, he bit off Ahab's leg, you know, in the book.
Yeah.
You kind of believe that to be a rather common occurrence.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, of 2,500 whaling captains, only about 45 were actually killed by whales.
Well,
Not
yeah.
that that's insignificant,
No,
but that's
right.
out of 15,913 whaling trips that were taken in this 280 plus year period of whaling. So that was rather a rare occurrence in the first place.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, you know, but that's the part that's captured our imagination.
Yes, yes, it's true.
All right, you know, the only known recorded time a whale attacked a ship was the whale ship Essex,
Right,
you know, which it sank.
right.
There's several other ones, the Anne Alexander, you know, and you'll hear about more of these, but we don't really know what happened because the people didn't all make it back.
Right.
You know, it's hearsay.
Yes.
You know, at times.
Well, it's amazing. The volume, the history is absolutely amazing. Speaking of history, I was especially struck when you wrote that for more than 2/3 of the time, whaling was a thriving industry. Slavery of Blacks was the law of the land. So how did these factors intersect?
You know, so many ways. You know, first, there are various hosts of numbers. I think the lowest number is that 40% of all the people who ever went whaling deserted upon or after their first ship.
First ship. They didn't last
First
more than
time.
one ship. One man,
First
one
time.
ship.
I say it's probably closer to 90,000, 90%. Well, we know that over the entire period of whaling's existence, those 15,900 and so trips, about 175,000 people ever went whaling, and 30 to 40% of them were men of color, because this was a job really no one wanted to do, while at the same time, men of color didn't have as many options.
Right.
They couldn't go to work, you know, on dad's farm.
Right.
You know, they couldn't get hired at their uncle's grocery store.
Right.
You know, these are a few options. Well, you have a business that's so bad. The food was bad, the working conditions, it was dangerous. Probably the worst thing about it was the boredom. You know,
Yeah.
and again, you're aboard a ship for 3.5 to 4 years with the same 30 people, you know, living in space the size of the back seat of an SUV is your personal space, you know, where you sleep and where you rest overnight.
Unbelievable.
No one wanted to do that.
No.
Okay. But, you know, we've been able to identify, you know, now about 52, 53, you know, men that were fairly certain were both Black or people of color and became captains of these whale ships.
Right.
Which is astounding.
It is. It is.
You know,
it speaks to what they were leaving in order, you know, to have freedom, what they were willing to endure.
Right. And to do it again over and over and over and over and over again.
Right.
Okay.
Exactly.
You know, now we know, you know, thanks to, you know, a lot of work by a lot of people, some brand new, literally, you know, information from this past spring.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Barbara Coffey did some research, you know, and was able to determine the returns of whaling,
Okay.
which over its entire history was about 4.7%. Now you compare that to the U.S. bond, which is 4.6%, you know, which is not a lot. But again, this is 15,000 trips, each of which was a separate business enterprise. So some were wildly successful, and some people never came back and may have been on boats that were uninsured. So once you factor all that, she's come up with this 4.7%.
Right.
As luck would have it, I asked her if she would do it for my captains, and she was able to find enough data to find out that the whaling captains of color's returns were about 11.7%.
Right.
Or as we used to say on Wall Street, these guys' performance was 3x. Wow. They performed at 3 times better.
Wow.
Well, then if you parse it out a little bit further, some of the captains, you know, William Shorey, you know, was like 63%.
Wow.
In his 30-some whaling trips. John T. Gonzalez was in the 20%. Yeah. So I've imputed that whaling was a $10 billion industry over its entire period of time.
That is,
and I like to interject as early as I can, you know, that nowadays, you know, when we're not killing the whales, more money is generated in watching whales than killing them. You know, I think that last number I saw is about $1 billion a month. So in every year, in theory,
Yeah.
Each year, we'll spend more to watch whales than we ever did to kill them.
Wow. And it's so much better because of that, right?
I would be the first to agree.
Yes. So that is all amazing. And I am so pleased that I was able to talk to you about all of these subjects. I wish we had more time because I know that there's a lot more questions I wanted to ask you.
Well,
If
you
we
can
wanted-
buy this book and read it.
That's right. Exactly. People must buy this book to read it and really just get an incredible insight on it. Where can they buy it?
A host of places. Typically, I always ask, please go to your local independent bookstore and buy the book. You know, we need books. We need these stores to provide them.
Right.
Absent that, Amazon is always an easy place to go.
Yep.
There's several bookstores, in Washington, here on Martha's Vineyard, Nantucket, Miller's on Nantucket, Bunch of Grapes on Martha's Vineyard, here where I live.
Good.
And then, of course, Amazon. You probably get your best financial deal from Amazon.
Yeah.
The book is a little bit expensive, but it did cost a lot of money for the Naval Institute Press to produce.
Right, exactly. And it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it. It's a really good summary of history. It's a great insight on racial relations. It's a great insight on the whole whaling industry. Really amazing. So thank you so much for appearing on the show. And I really look forward to seeing you again someplace on one of your appearances. I know you're still doing a lot of appearances around the Cape and on the South Shore and other places.
Yeah,
So
check my website for more places, skipfinley.com.
perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for watching
Kathleen,
Books in the World.
Thank you.
Take care. Take care now.